Nehemiah rebuilds the wall. Well, we've read how Nehemiah prayed for God to help him, and he comes before the king and asks him if he can go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild the wall, and the king says yes, and gives him all the wood he needs. And he gets back, and he's a very lonely man, Nehemiah. He just, one night, goes round the walls with his donkey, and there's times when the walls are so badly fallen over that he can't even get his donkey to go over them. But he encourages the people, and the local people who weren't Jews, the man called Sanballat and Tobiah, the Ammonite, and Geshem, the Arab, they laughed him to scorn, and they said, "We're going to get you in trouble for doing this." But despite all the problems, he keeps on, and he splits up the wall into different sections, and he encourages different groups of people to rebuild it. And there were different gates leading into the city, and it was very important to make sure that they were safe and secure. So he gives different people different jobs, and it says that they built the wall, they set up the gates, and they put locks on the doors and bars on them.
How would they have made the locks, though?
I would think with difficulty, because they'd have just had to do their best. So, about one part of the wall, it says that the nobles, the leaders, were given this part of the wall to repair, but they did not put their necks to the work of the Lord. In other words, they didn't work very hard. They thought, oh, this is above us to drag wood and stones around. And there were other parts of the wall that were repaired very well, and the people who'd done their part of the wall went and built the other parts of the wall that other people hadn't done. And so that's the spirit that there should be, that it's not enough to say, oh, well, I've done my bit. If someone else hasn't done their bit, well, for whatever reason, you better go and do it. There was another section of the wall that was repaired by the apothecaries. Now, that's an old word that means the chemists. They were used to making up medicines, and I don't suppose they were very used to dragging bricks and stones and things like that around. So they did what was not natural for them to do. And there were also men who repaired parts of the wall, and it says, and their daughters helped them. Now, in those days, women didn't do that kind of work. But absolutely everybody, men and women, and probably children, those who were used to working and those who weren't used to this kind of work, they all did their piece. And the goldsmiths, they were people used to working with gold, used to making rings and necklaces. They repaired their bit. And again, I don't suppose they were used to doing that sort of work. So then everybody got on with the work, whether or not it was what they felt they were good at doing.
About the people who worked with gold, well, I guess it wasn't that hard for them, seeing that, well, they might have been able to chisel out a few things, because...
Well, they put whatever talents they had to use for the work in hand. And this is how we should be as we're doing God's work. But when Sanballat, this is the enemy of the Jews, when he heard that we built the wall, he was really angry, and he mocked us, he laughed at us. You can imagine what he was saying. You've got women on your job, you've got people who aren't even builders building this. And he laughed at it, and he said, they're not strong enough to do this. How on earth are they going to complete the work? Even if a fox went up, a little fox could break down their stone wall. Well, Nehemiah prays, and that's what we should do. When people are nasty to us, pray. And that's the great example of Nehemiah. So he says, this is Nehemiah 4 verse 4, after they've said this, even if a fox goes up, he will break down their wall they've built. Nehemiah prayed, hear, O our God, for we're despised, and turn all this back upon them. Don't let their sin they've done be blotted out, for they have provoked you to anger. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together, for the people had a mind to work. So when we have nasty situations, and you'll find this as you do God's work, that some people will be against you, you've got to pray. Not allow yourself to get so upset by words, and we might all think, oh, it's only words, but actually words of people can really hurt. And that's why we've got to be very careful with our words. And he asks God to hear these words these men had said. Well, of course God listens and knows everything, but he's bringing it before God. And that's what we can do. If somebody calls us a nasty name, or says, you're too little to do that, and it really hurts us, or far worse than that, tell God about it. Of course God knows, but bring it before God and turn to him rather than retaliate. And it happened that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the gaps began to be filled in, they were very angry. And they decided to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stop the work. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set our men to watch day and night because of them. So again, we made our prayer unto our God. And that's the great example of this, that at every turn Nehemiah is praying to God. But it was very, very difficult. There were problems all the time. Judah said the strength of the workers is decayed. They were worn out. And there's so much rubbish that needs to be moved, so we're not able to carry on doing it. Our enemies said, we're going to come upon them suddenly and they won't know. We'll just come upon them when they're not expecting it. And they mocked at us and said, you're going to run back to where you came from. So I set the workers with their swords and their spears and their bows. And I said to them, be not afraid of these people. Remember the Lord, who is great and strong, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your families. And when our enemies knew that we knew their plans, and that God had brought their plans to nothing, then we returned back to the work on the wall. And it happened that half of my servants worked in the work, and the other half held spears and shields and bows. So can you imagine? The workers were building while the others were holding shields to stop arrows landing on them. And they worked, and eventually the wall was built.
Well, it's good that they had some protection.
Yes, but the greatest protection, of course, was God. And so, in the end, God's work will get done if we keep on and on with it.